All right, so I'm going to close these little open panels. And the next feature that I want to go over is this one right here called the Perspective Grid tool. The Perspective Grid tool. Now you'll notice that the Perspective Grid tool also comes in with a tool called the Perspective Selection tool. When you activate the Perspective Grid tool, this is what you get. What it is, it's a grid to illustrate over. That's what it is. Okay, now it's one of those features that on the surface look really amazing, but then in practice, it's okay. It's not great. All right, so before we get into how this works, I want to show you that this is a visual aid. So if I go to the View menu, you'll notice that the Perspective Grid and its submenus are there. All right, and you'll notice the first option, what does it say? Hide grid. The reason I brought that up is that I get students all the time that accidentally launch it, and they're like, how do I get out of it? How do I get out of it? So you go to View, go to Perspective Grid, and you hit Hide Grid. Now you're out of it. Okay? So let me activate that again. Boop, boop. There it is. Now let's go back to that menu. You'll notice that when we get to this menu, there are different perspective types. Have any of you ever taken a drawing class and you learned how to draw in perspective? Raise your hands. I was hoping to see more hands in that, but you should take a drawing class, guys, and then you'll learn about perspective. So there are 3 types of perspective drawing strategies. One of them is called one-point perspective. And so what this will do is it sets up the grid to follow that. Now, one-point perspective means that there's when it's talking about points, it's referring to something called vanishing points. And it's sort of like, where is the object sort of falling into the horizon? In this case, there's one point. This form of perspective is used to demonstrate or illustrate. You're standing in the middle of a road and you look down the road. It appears as if the edges of the road are meeting at a point at the horizon. Or if you're standing at the base of a building and it's really tall and you're looking at it, it looks as if the sides of the building are coming closer together the further away it is from you. So that's one-point perspective. There's one vanishing point. If we go to the View menu, go back to Perspective Grid, this is two-point perspective. It's as if you're looking at the side of a building, the corner of a building. And then there's, last but not least, three-point perspective. Where is it? View, Perspective Grid, three-point perspective. Now, the default setting is two-point perspective. What we have here is the position of the horizon line. So this green line allows me to, whoops, that just freaked out, didn't it? If I click on this right here, it allows me to reposition the horizon. Okay, so that's the horizon line. And then to the right and left, this is the vanishing point. So I can change the vanishing point along the perspective grid. Right, so I can build my own perspective presentation if I want to. Now, you'll notice that we also have this little manipulator. You'll notice that when I click on one of these faces, it activates a color on it. What this indicates is what side of the grid you are actively working on. So what side am I working on right now, Joel? The left, the right, and the horizon. Okay, so let me go to the left. So when I activate the left, this is the side that's ready to take information. Okay, so the perspective grid works with primitives and your pen tool. Okay, so I have the grid active. I know that the left side is active. I'm going to go to this rectangle tool and I'm going to draw along the grid. So you'll notice that the shape is conforming to the perspective grid. Okay? Now if I want to draw on this face, I have to activate the right side on the manipulator, and now I'll draw a rectangle on this side. Okay? If I select the object, you'll notice that when I try to distort it, it breaks from it. So if I want to manipulate the object, I have to go to Perspective Grid Selection Tool. Now when I select the object and try to distort it, you'll notice that it maintains the relationship with the grid. So if I want to work along the grid and select an object, I use the Perspective Selection Tool. Make sense? Okay, so if you go to YouTube, there's a lot of beautiful demonstrations on how to use this tool to illustrate like a building or a road or a sidewalk, something like that. Honestly, I don't use this tool. I just don't. So the type of work that I do does not lend itself well for this particular feature. But
sorry, I think it's good for like typography sometimes.
Possibly, possibly. But like I said, there's some interesting tutorials where you find people illustrating really complicated buildings, you know, stuff like that. It's kind of interesting, so you might want to check it out. But that's basically how this works. And once I deactivate the grid, hide it, obviously it's no longer in play. It's off, right? And these are going to be distorted, however, you know, the software will allow you to distort it. So that was the perspective feature.